The world's backup oil route just stopped looking safe. And that changes how energy moves across the world. On March 17, 2026, renewed Iranian attacks on the United Arab Emirates turned the Gulf energy shock into a wider infrastructure crisis. Operations at Fujairah were disrupted again after fresh strikes and fire, while passage through the Strait of Hormuz remained heavily restricted. That changed the story. The world was no longer watching only the main choke point. It was now watching the route designed to bypass that choke point. The geographic exposure spreads quickly. India, China, Japan, and South Korea depend heavily on Gulf crude and refined fuels. Europe is exposed because Gulf energy moving west still depends on the Bab el-Mandeb, the Suez Canal, and the SUMED pipeline, after leaving the Arabian Sea. The UAE matters directly because Fujairah sits on the Gulf of Oman, outside Hormuz, and normally helps exporters keep oil moving even when the strait is threatened. The exposure snapshot is stark. The Strait of Hormuz usually carries around 20 million barrels per day, equal to about 25% of world seaborne oil trade, with roughly 80% of those flows destined for Asia. About 93% of Qatar's LNG exports, and 96% of the UAE's LNG exports, also pass through the strait, representing about 19% of global LNG trade. The system is concentrated. That is why a shock in one narrow corridor spreads so fast. The system map is plain. Oil leaves Gulf fields and export terminals, passes through Hormuz, or moves by pipeline toward Fujairah and the Red Sea, then heads to refineries across Asia and Europe. Saudi Arabia has increased east-west pipeline flows from about 1.7 million barrels per day in 2025 to roughly 5.9 million by March 9, aiming toward the line's 7 million barrel per day capacity. The UAE has been pushing more crude through the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, which can move about 1.5 million barrels per day to the Gulf of Oman. Named bottlenecks are now visible. Hormuz remains constrained. Fujairah, a critical exit point for about 1 million barrels per day of Murban crude, has come under direct pressure. War risk insurance remains high. Tanker access is uncertain. Spare pipeline capacity exists, but only about 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day can bypass Hormuz, far below normal seaborne volumes. Operational behavior changed immediately. Some tankers still moved. Others paused, rerouted, or waited for new instructions. The thesis is simple. This matters because the event is no longer only about one choke point. It is about the backup infrastructure failing under stress, which makes the whole oil system less flexible, more expensive, and more likely to reach ordinary life. Immediate effects appear in crude prices, freight quotes, and fuel insurance. Short-term effects reach refinery planning, reserve management, and cargo allocation. Medium-term effects move into diesel, jet fuel, fertilizer, and consumer inflation. Fujairah matters because it is the UAE's outlet outside Hormuz. When that outlet falters, the pressure spreads outward faster than markets first expect. The first household signal is not always the oil price. Often, it is diesel, gas, and delivery costs arriving all at once. On March 16, US average diesel prices crossed $5 a gallon for only the second time ever. That matters because diesel sits close to ordinary life. It moves freight, powers farm equipment, feeds construction activity, and keeps distribution networks running. When the Middle East loses both crude flows and refined product flexibility, diesel tightens faster than many people expect. A route failure at Hormuz, and a disruption at Fujairah, can show up later in a grocery bill or courier charge. Fuel is the clearest channel. A delayed tanker affects refinery inputs. A refinery short on the right crude makes harder choices about output. Wholesale fuel costs rise. Trucking companies pay more. Bus operators, delivery fleets, and airlines adjust their prices. Households then feel the effect in commuting, travel, and monthly budgeting. The infrastructure to household link is direct. When crude cannot move smoothly through Hormuz, or out through Fujairah, the cost of movement starts changing everywhere else. LPG is another channel. Households in India and across Asia depend on cooking gas that is tied to Gulf exports and shipping reliability. If exporters prioritize core contracts, loading schedules slip, or governments begin protecting domestic supply, importers pay more or wait longer. That does not stay inside ports. It moves into bottling plants, distributor schedules, and home kitchens. Food comes next. Diesel is used in tractors, irrigation, transport, and cold storage. Fertilizer depends on gas, shipping, and timely delivery before planting windows close. If fuel and fertilizer costs rise together, the pressure reaches grain, vegetables, meat, and packaged food. The delay is longer than with petrol, but the path is real. A shock at an oil corridor becomes a food cost problem through transport and farm inputs. Travel also changes. Airlines do not only pay more for jet fuel, they also face more expensive cargo movement and longer route planning if Gulf airspace or hub operations are disrupted. Passenger tickets rise first on tighter routes. Then air freight costs feed into medicine, electronics, and urgent industrial parts. Some firms absorb that, others shorten quotes, or defend margins. The household version is simple. A tanker pauses, a port slows, a pipeline fills, a refinery revises runs, a fuel distributor pays more, a trucker raises rates, a wholesaler trims promotions. Then a family notices that groceries, transport, and basic goods are becoming harder to hold steady. This is why daily life matters in this story. Most viewers will never see Fujairah, the east-west pipeline, or the Habshan-Fujairah line. But they live inside the consequences of those routes. When the backup system weakens, ordinary life becomes more expensive, even before the main system fully fails. That spread is uneven, not dramatic. But it is practical. Some countries cushion households with reserves or subsidies. Others cannot. So the same disruption that starts in Gulf energy infrastructure can end as pressures on kitchens, paychecks, and neighborhood prices. This event sits inside a machine of routes, terminals, pipelines, refineries, and emergency institutions. The hidden system starts with Gulf production fields and export terminals. Saudi crude moves toward facilities such as Ras Tanura, on the Gulf Coast. UAE crude can move either toward Hormuz, or through the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, to the Gulf of Oman. Saudi Arabia also has the East-West pipeline, which runs from Abqaiq to Yanbu on the Red Sea. These lines are not symbolic. They are the physical alternatives when ships cannot pass normally through Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz remains the central artery. It links Gulf exporters to Asian refiners, and global LNG buyers. Around 20 million barrels per day, or about 25% of world seaborne oil trade, usually pass through it. About 80% of those oil flows head to Asia. The same waterway also carries about 19% of global LNG trade, including roughly 93% of Qatar's LNG exports, and 96% of the UAE's LNG exports. That means the hidden machine is not only about crude. It is also about gas, power generation, fertilizer, and industrial feedstocks. The bypass routes explain why Fujairah matters so much. Fujairah sits outside Hormuz, on the Gulf of Oman. It is a storage, loading, and trading hub, and it serves as the outlet for the UAE's Habshan-Fujairah pipeline. Reuters describes it as a critical exit point for about 1 million barrels per day of Murban crude, equal to roughly 1% of global demand. In normal conditions, that gives the UAE a way to keep some exports moving even when the strait looks risky. But the anatomy has limits. The IEA says only Saudi Arabia and the UAE have operational crude pipelines that can redirect flows around Hormuz, with about 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day of available bypass capacity. Saudi officials are trying to push the east-west line towards 7 million barrels per day. The UAE line can move about 1.5 million. Useful, but still small beside the corridor they are replacing. Refineries are another part of the machine. Asian plants are built around regular Gulf supply, especially medium and sour grades that fit existing hardware and yield needs. They cannot instantly replace every missing barrel with any other barrel. So the hidden system is not just a shipping map. It is a compatibility map involving crude grades, port access, storage, insurance, and refinery settings. Institutions complete the picture. The IEA's coordinated emergency release matters because strategic reserves are the policy equivalent of spare route capacity. They buy time when infrastructure fails. So the real system beneath the headline is simple to describe. Fields produce, terminals load, Hormuz carries, pipelines bypass some risk, Fujairah and Yanbu act as alternative outlets, refineries transform crude into everyday fuels, emergency reserves slow the shock. That is the machine underneath the headline today. When every part works, the public barely notices it. When one route fails, and the backup route wobbles, the machine suddenly becomes visible everywhere. Pressure spreads through this system by changing behavior before it produces a complete visible shortage. The event comes first. Iranian attacks disrupt UAE infrastructure again, Fujairah operations are hit, and Hormuz remains heavily restricted. Then comes hesitation. Tanker owners ask whether to enter the area. Insurers review cover. Exporters slow loading decisions. Buyers hesitate over prompt cargoes, because they do not know whether ships, ports, and routes will still be usable when the cargo arrives. Hesitation turns into adjustment. Saudi Arabia pushes harder on the east-west pipeline toward Yanbu. The UAE routes more crude through the Habshan-Fujairah line. Iraq opens talks with Iran to protect tanker movement, and speeds work on the Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline to Turkey, as another outlet. These are not symbolic responses. They are rerouting decisions by states and operators trying to keep physical barrels moving. Adjustment becomes triage. Exporters prioritize the cargoes and corridors they believe they can protect. Ports and terminals protect core loadings first. Refiners protect core product output. Governments protect domestic consumers where they can. This is where substitution appears. A seaborne route is partially replaced by pipeline. A Gulf outlet is partially replaced by a Red Sea or Turkish route. A buyer that wanted one grade starts bidding for another. None of this is smooth. It is simply the world trying not to stop. Cost arrives next. War risk insurance stays elevated. Freight prices rise. Physical crude outside Hormuz becomes more valuable because it is easier to deliver. Diesel prices then move faster than many headline crude watchers expect. In the United States, average diesel prices moved above $5 a gallon on March 16, for only the second time ever. That is the stress moving from the route map into freight and manufacturing. Then uncertainty widens. Traders shorten quotes because tomorrow's shipping cost may be different. Importers protect inventory because replacement cargoes are uncertain. Airlines and logistics firms defend margins. Households and companies start expecting more price pressure, so spending and procurement behavior changes before official inflation data fully catches up. States also change behavior. The IEA prepares additional reserve support. Countries with stocks release fuel, or discuss subsidies. Others consider rationing, tax cuts, or priority allocation. Firms do the same in their own language. They conserve stock, delay non-essential purchases, protect scarce slots, and choose which customers get served first. This is the widening stage. Event becomes hesitation. Hesitation becomes rerouting. Rerouting becomes triage. Triage becomes higher cost. Higher cost becomes uncertainty. Uncertainty becomes system pressure. By then, the machine is still running, but it is running differently. The important point is behavioral. People and institutions do not wait for a full outage. They revise contracts, protect margins, hoard flexibility, shorten exposure, and prioritize survival. That is how the world behaves once the machine is stressed, and it is why the public usually feels the effects after the operators have already been changing course for days. Banks also price more caution into trade finance, and shipping monitors watch every incident more closely. This event made the backup system visible. Most people understand that the Strait of Hormuz matters. Fewer think about Fujairah, Yanbu, Abqaiq, or the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline. Yet those places help decide whether oil can keep moving when the main corridor is under pressure. They are part of the hidden scaffolding of ordinary life. When they work, the system looks resilient. When they come under attack too, resilience looks thinner. That is the deeper meaning of March 17. The world was not only reminded that a narrow choke point can shake global markets. It was reminded that the routes built to reduce that risk are limited, uneven, and vulnerable themselves. A backup route is not the same thing as a full substitute. A reserve release is not the same thing as restored normality. A pipeline can buy time, but it cannot instantly replace an open sea lane carrying 20 million barrels per day. There is still resilience here. Pipelines exist. Emergency stocks exist. Refineries can adjust. Buyers can substitute. Governments can intervene. But each of those tools works under constraint, and each becomes more valuable when the system is already strained. So the lesson is grounded and plain. Ordinary life depends not only on big visible events, but on quiet routes and facilities that most people never see. What does it mean when even the backup infrastructure of normality begins to look fragile?